We're now going to hear from various peoples and groups from all across Australia, parts of Australia, about their joint management experience and takeaways. This will be directly followed by a short break and then a Q&A session. The panel will comprise of Dr. Dermot Smythe, and who we just heard from, and several other presenters we're about to hear from. While you can submit your questions via the live Q&A function during the presentations, we'll hold off interrupting these and ask the questions following the morning tea session for the panel discussion. So firstly, I would like to introduce representatives from the Wuthathi Aboriginal Corporation in Queensland. I hope I pronounced that right. Apologies if I haven't. Keron and Jim. So Keron Murray and Jim Turnour will be presenting now. Thanks, Keron and Jim.
Thank you. How you going? You are Keron Murray. I am Uncle Mama Kandawinchi Wuthathi from Shelbourne Bay on the eastern side of Cape York. I'm also the chairman for the Aboriginal Corporation. I'm a general manager, Jim Turnour here. Today we'll be presenting on our experience with joint management.
So do you want to talk a bit about our country?
Wuthathi Shelbourne Bay is located 800 kilometres north of Cairns, 200 k's from the tip of Cape York Peninsula. We manage about 1,198 square kilometres of land and 8,963 square kilometres of sea. We got 10 islands in our region, including Rain Island and the Great Barrier Reef. There it is there. So 118,000 hectares of land, actually, to correct myself. There's just some slideshows there, some parts of our country. The Bowls River, and that's out in the sand dunes. Or Nachi, that's Turnour, Rain Island, the largest green sea turtle rookery in the world, also the largest nesting seabird on the Great Barrier Reef, and the largest congregation of tiger sharks. Just a few slideshows of some images of country. And this here is just a map, because joint management is very focused on tenure, and they only want to sort of spend their money where they can on the park. But for our mob, it's all our land, so we have to have a more holistic approach on how we manage and care for country. So this map relates to our IPA, which shows the certain tenures, which is in the orange our freehold land, and the darker green, which is our national park under the Wuthathi tenure. But we're also part of Bromley, which is Wuthathi, Northern Kandja and Cookiya joint managed land. So on the other parts, it shows some of the lands that Wuthathi hold interest, where our lands are separated into Bromley, another corporation, and in the white, they are yet to be determined lands. And out of the blue, that's our Turnour area, which goes from Captain Billy out to Malta, Turnour, down to Red Reef.
Explain Turnour, because that's in Queensland.
Well, Turnour in Queensland, it's a traditional use marine resource area, which originally started around like with our law and custom and the right to fish and hunt and practice our law on the sea with the turtle and dugong. But since then, it's evolved a lot through the Brumper. They use it more as the flagship programs or how they engage with traditional owners. But once again, they're another agency that, they talk about it, but they're not there yet. They all talk co-management, but it's all got to be traditional owner driven and not just capacity building, but transition, so the traditional owners are in the driver's seat. Next slide there. So this is our understanding of the joint management government context. For us, as like Wuthathi people, we got our Wuthathi Kincha, which is our law and custom, which is our policies and procedures and how we manage country and the right for decision making. But on the other side is how joint management see it. It's just a non-Indigenous domain, Australian and Queensland law, and that's where the two have to combine. But next slide. So the Joint Management Program structures empower non-Indigenous law through legislation and funding, and disempowering Wuthathi Kincha law. They're all laws that are written formally through like contracts with IMA, IPAs, workplace health and safety, employment, environment, native title, etc. But under our law and how we manage, it's the law from the elders, plus the things that are extra, our connection to country, our relationships and responsibility to our family and mob, social and economic, plus also the teaching and cultural practices that we must maintain and continue for our mob, like ceremony, story, place, protocols, hunting, etc. And just a little bit more with what we was talking about was Wuthathi's approach to joint management was good governance, having a strong board, not just a strong like ORIC board, but also strong cultural governance, and the two need to combine. We have an Elders Council setting and the direction and experience skill-based administration implementing plans. We have an approach where you cannot manage land based on tenure and funding. Like I mentioned before, you gotta have that more holistic approach, not just for us as people, but from government perspective, parks and all them. Me personally, when they say they're conservationists, sometimes I think they're just more based on revenue. Re-establishing boundaries of Wuthathi First Nation and taking a tenure-blind approach. Indigenous Protected Area Plan was a good tool that guides and helps bring the governance of a more traditional owner-led thing, and with a round table that we have that one sole management vision for caring for country, that anyone who wants to work with us must align with our vision and our aspirations and our goals, so that we're not running around just meeting things based on funding, and then you're setting yourself up to fail, or just by tenure blind, as I keep saying, you've got to have that more holistic approach. So we've got multiple partnerships and sources of funding, government funding, IPA, Ranger, what we call our mob land and sea custodians. We try to come away from the word ranger and that. And we have philanthropic, business, tourism and NRM services, and engage with all levels of government, minister and departments, and building a positive image for our mob. But a lot of time, this is with national parks, they're very centered in just what happens on the park. But one thing that we found, and that the best thing for all mob, is to make your plan based on all of your country, not just the tenure of the national park, because you'll get wound up just trying to make ends meet for government and national park, when, like I keep saying, probably sound like a broken record, you need that more holistic approach where it's tenure blind and you can manage country wholly, because things out there like weeds, pests, visitors, whatever, they don't discriminate and they don't look and say, hey, that's a national park, I've got to stop. They go across. It's there. That's just some images of our healthy country plan. As mentioned, we've got all these different layer tenures, and government want to throw everything on you. But our trick has sort of been to navigate the system and work things the way they work for us. Government or parks will always have their plan, but we need our plan just like they do. So our healthy country plan is the overall document which plans out all our vision and management and goes more in depth than just your IPAs. Your IPAs are more part of the NCA Act, just like parks, but it's all about tenure. Whereas a healthy country plan takes into a lot more of your values about, the social economics for all the mob, plus our culture and our law and our custom and things that are important to us, but government tend to not really worry about. So, and that's our governing vision and how we manage country. And I'll have a break and hand it to Jim to explain some of the rest of the stuff.
Yeah, no worries, Keron. Hello, everyone. So, as Keron said, the elders and the director have set a really clear vision of where they want to go, and the power balance in terms of funding and regulation sit with government in terms of the joint management program. And we're working to reform that to get them to take not a siloed and programmatic approach, but more of a holistic approach to the management of country. And so we have to deal with those issues. So at the moment, the program, the approach to joint management that we experience is a siloed programmatic approach and what I call transactional contracting. So it's short term. They've got an Indigenous management agreement, which is the contract, the overarching document that Wuthathi signed that has an IDIA associated with it when the park was established and the lands were basically returned, but they've always been Wuthathi lands. And then that sets the overall foundation. But every year we have an Indigenous park activity agreement that's very operational, very focused on meeting their legislative requirements and not holistic or focused on the broader Wuthathi lands. So that's the current approach. It's a very tenure-centred approach. So as the map early on, you would have seen had a range of tenures from the National Park Aboriginal freehold to some of the Wuthathi area held in another Aboriginal corporation, and then other areas that we're still negotiating to get land back. The way the government sees it is that framework, whereas Wuthathi people and elders see it holistically. And we recognise that we've got to, at times, deal with the tenure, but we want government not to just sit in their own silos, but to look holistically at country. We're working around that. And one of the issues around that is the national park that Wuthathi have, you can't actually access it. There's no tracks in it or whatnot. So every year there's funding allocated for it, but the only way to get in is a helicopter like. So, and we've been in an ongoing discussion, argument with Queensland Parks and Wildlife Service about using that funding outside to develop a buffer zone, make sure it's achieving good outcomes around environment, cultural heritage outcomes, but not just wasting money because it has to be spent on the national park. In the end, Wuthathi people fought to have their land back. They stopped mining on this country. They stopped spaceports. They stopped a whole lot of activities happening, and they're managing the whole area as an Indigenous protected area. But all joint management wants to do is focus on the national park, and that's an ongoing conflict and waste of resources from our experience. So we can stick with the Queensland government approach, or we can move to what we're trying to get to, which is a First Nation place-based approach, centred on a holistic shared plan. So the Healthy Country Plan is what they've developed. Out of that, we've got an Indigenous Protected Area Plan, IPA plan. It's in the final stages before getting dedicated. And then that sets the framework in terms of our relationships with all of our partners. It's a tenure-blind approach. And we'd like to move to relational contracting rather than transactional contracting. So a lot of the range of working on country contracting is much more like that rather than short-term transactional. And we think that when we move to that sort of a framework, we'll get much more mutual respect and increasing efficiency of using funding, but also help close the gap and get a much better outcomes on the ground. So they're the things that we're working towards to try and reform joint management. And we are doing questions at the end, so we can leave it there if you like.
One thing I just wanted to add, it is going good and starting to work, and all that land is Aboriginal private property. That's just a layer of national park. It's not grant funding, it's money committed in perpetuity for a lifetime of that tenure. Parks will tell you that it's Parks Activity Agreement, it's grant funding. That's not, it's a lie. That's all Aboriginal private property.
Yeah, so they're talking about, so Keron's talking about the orange areas are Aboriginal freehold, and the green areas are Aboriginal freehold with a national park joint management, Indigenous management agreement over it. And every year we have an Indigenous park activity agreement which allocates funding for the use on that national park. But these roads don't actually exist. The track in there, we're trying to get them in there at the moment. And yeah, there's inefficiency in the way they use funding. And like Keron said, there's about 5 or 6 tenures, 2 organisations, potentially 3 organisations. It pulls people apart, it's very inefficient, and we're trying to move away from this programmatic approach to more of a holistic First Nations place-based approach, integrating funding and focus on outcomes rather than program outputs. Leave it there. Is that all right?
Thanks a lot, Keron and Jim, for your great presentation and providing some of that honesty when it comes to land tenure. And I think across what we got from Dermot's was very similar. And I thanks again for that presentation. I'm sure it's going to stimulate a lot of conversation. Hopefully in the Q&A session that happens a little bit later. Thanks a lot for your presentation. Now I'm going to introduce the next speaker. So Cathy. Thomas from Gunaikurnai Land and Waters Aboriginal Corporation. So Cathy, very welcome. You're a little bit earlier than you thought, but we'll just pass it over and welcome Cathy now. Thank you, Cathy.
Thanks, Bill. Yeah, firstly, I'd like to start by acknowledging that the land that I'm standing on today, the Barbaran country, is one of 5 clans of the Gunaikurnai, and pay my respects to my elders past and present, and respects to the other Aboriginals present today. Yeah, so my name's Cathy Thomas. I'm a proud Jurunjang Gunaikurnai woman. Yeah, working with GLAWAC, so Gunaikurnai Land and Waters Aboriginal Corporation. I'm actually on a secondment with Parks at the moment, so I'm stepping in for Robbie Farnham. He's our joint management manager here at GLAWAC. He manages 8 ranges. So my role here at GLAWAC usually is the JM crew leader. I sit under Robbie, and yeah, both of us run our GK ranges. So our journey started in 2010 for Gunaikurnai. We run south of the Snowy River here in East Gippsland, and it goes down to the west of just had a brain freeze. Wilson's Prom, and yeah, sort of to the mountains along the escarpment up to Hossam. So the Gunaikurnai people are the traditional owners of the lands down here. We've got handed back 10 parks and reserves. Our country has 20 rivers, creeks, and feeder lake systems, which we have a diverse landscape from red gum plains, coastal bushlands, rainforests, sand dunes, and wetlands. As Robbie calls it, mountain to the sea. I'm just going to sort of read off Robbie's notes and add a little bit of my bits and pieces in. So Robbie's notes was, it gives us pride as Aboriginal men and women chance to say what happens on country and learn and work from each other in joint managed with Parks Victoria. Joint management has given our people employment, empowerment, to see a seat at the table and speak up the importance of why we need to look after country and why to protect our cultural sites are important to us. The benefits is the opportunity to work out on country, to walk side by side with Parks Victoria and other stakeholders. It gives our people pride. We get to work out on country with family and community. It has given our people a lot more employment in the area. We work together with other stakeholders and other Aboriginal organisations, such as our medical centres here in East Gippsland. Our lessons learnt, some of the lessons was to make sure we follow our aspirations and build a strong, confident team, and to learn from each other and gather as much knowledge as possible from our elders out on country and protect our cultural sites. The training, we need to provide efficient training to our rangers. More women rangers is one of our things that we struggled with here, and team building programs and gatherings with park staff and working bees in our JM parks. I just want to play a little video that Robbie and our rangers put together.
To me, me, joint management means that we as traditional owners are able to work on country and manage country our way, but also learn from others and teach others while we share our knowledge and experience. The benefits of working on country as far as joint management goes is that we are able to read country and pay our respects while acknowledging our great Mother Earth, which creates healing for both ourselves and country. I believe joint management works well considering it allows us as traditional owners to manage our land and give back to country. That in itself creates a balance of knowledge and understanding of how far we've come. Also, with the amount of information that Parks Victoria and DELP are willing to share with us proves just how important we as traditional owners are to the natural environment.
I believe joint management means recognising traditional owners and the deep understanding of land, water and biodiversity. The benefits we get, it creates job opportunities for us to be out on country and to learn and to show the elders that we are caring for country, healing country and protecting country. And it also gives them an opportunity to share stories with us while out on country.
Joint management means that we work alongside Parks Victoria as a partnership, allowing us both to bring our knowledge and skills to the management of protected areas. The environments we look after are forests, rivers, beaches, plants and animals. The benefits I get from working as a joint management ranger are being able to work on our country every day, getting to learn more and more about my culture and walk in the paths my ancestors once did. Today, I reckon it works pretty good, but there's always room for improvements.
G'day, Russell Dow, Joint Managed Ranger for Glawak. Currently we're standing at Tarrabolga, which is one of our 10 parks and reserves that we manage with Parks Victoria. It's a wonderful place to work and I'm pretty lucky to call it my office. I love working on country because it gets you out amongst everything and you get a good feel for nature. A lot of people ask me what it's like to be out here on country, and the best thing I can say is to come out on country yourself and get a feel for it, because it's really the feeling that you get when you're out here. You can be working out here by yourself and it's just like you're happy to be out here. It's not that you feel alone or anything, you're just out here amongst it all. You know, you hear noises, you see stuff's going, and, you know, the bird life out here is unreal, and that's one of the main things that you enjoy when you're out here. And so, yeah, it's all about the feeling, I think.
Yeah, g'day. My name is Mick Farnham. I'm a Joint Managed Ranger at Gunaikurnai Land and Waters. Joint management means to me working on country to heal country, working with different partners. The benefits would get from joint manage for me would be working with lots of different people from all over Gunaikurnai country, lots of different training, which might include fire, water, land management stuff. So yeah, it's been awesome.
Hi there, Harley Finn from Gunaikurnai Land Aboriginal Corporation. Joint management means to me working on country with our fellow joint management park rangers, teaching cultural practices and general maintenance, and building that connection and bond with Vic Parks. My highlights working with Glawak would be all the snorkeling training and to be able to work on country every day and healing country.
Highlights over the years, you know, from when I started in 2016, I feel like the joint management has grown a lot and it's only going to get bigger and better over the years. There's been a few highlights for me working in joint management. I've been able to travel to New South Wales, the ACT, got to meet different cultural rangers from, you know, in New South Wales, along as Victoria.
For that, Cathy. That was really good to get that personal perspective from the rangers as well about working on country. and I thank you for your presentation. Please make sure if you got any questions for Cathy, we've got a Q&A session after our break today, so please have your questions ready for that. So now I'll go back to Peter Donohoe from Northern Territory. And Peter, everyone has these type of technology glitches. It always happens, so don't feel too bad, mate. You're in good company. I've had them glitches myself yesterday. At the start, my computer camera went off, so we had a little bit of a delay ourselves, mate. So I'll hand it over to Peter now for his presentation. Thanks, Peter.
No worries, thanks, Bill. And yes, apologies everyone for that. Got there in the end. So yeah, look. So as I was saying, thanks for the invite to talk today, and I'd just like to start with acknowledging the traditional owners, the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people of the Canberra area. I'm actually talking from Canberra today, but I especially like to also acknowledge the traditional owners from the southern half of the Northern Territory, which I had the privilege of working with for sort of a couple of decades, and a large chunk of that in the joint management context in my role at the Central Land Council. I was based in Alice Springs, and today's presentation is essentially based on that experience. But I am, just to put it out there, full disclosure, I am currently actually working for Parks Australia in Canberra and just started here in March. I'm going to quickly, so we've only got 15 minutes. So I'm going to talk about the Northern Territory, but especially just Central Australia, and the joint management arrangements there. There are essentially a couple of models that operate within the Northern Territory. For example, Nitmiluk National Park has its own act, the Nitmiluk National Park Act, that sets out the framework for joint management, but just for that specific park, including how boards are established, their composition and powers, the financial arrangements, plans of management, etc. And there are a couple of other different arrangements, and Dermot actually touched on a couple of those. But today, my talk really is focused on the majority of the remaining Northern Territory government parks, or parks under the remit of the Northern Territory government, that came under joint management arrangements in the early 2000s, or early to mid 2000s, and really so 10 to 15 years, I guess. And I'm not going to go into the history of how those arrangements came about, but really just talk about the kind of state of play at the moment, from my view, I guess. So I guess similar to Uluru Kakadu, the underlying land tenure of those parks is Aboriginal freehold land under the Aboriginal Land Rights Act that only applies in the Northern Territory, and I think of it quite different to some other states. And that land is leased back to the Northern Territory government on long-term leases. The Territory Parks and Wildlife Act was subsequently changed, amended to include joint management provisions, and that act describes the objectives and principles of joint management and what needs to be in joint management plans. So again, sort of going on from what Dermot was saying, not necessarily driven from traditional owners, the offer, that initial offer. So, but in summary, the park lease, so those leases and the Parks Act and the management plans are the key legal documents that set the framework, and the park lease being the most significant legally, I would say, and kind of holds the greatest, or the most superior document, I would argue. Parks and Wildlife are responsible for day-to-day management. Sorry, a bit short, a bit slow on the slides there. And under this regime, there is no legislative requirement for boards to be established. And what's essentially resulted on the ground is the establishment of a number of informal committees for each park that the rangers will meet with from time to time, and management plans are developed through consultation with traditional owners, workshops and on-country camps, and the land councils have a statutory role in facilitating those processes and supporting traditional owners to participate in joint management. So that's the sort of dry bit, I guess. I guess before I sort of move on to the kind of highlights and challenges that I've experienced, I just think useful again to reflect on the benefits or kind of what was on offer. You know, what was in this for traditional owners in theory, and people have touched on this stuff already, but I'll just quickly go over it again. I guess, and in the NT, a key kind of carrot was basically recognition of land ownership and the land being handed back as Aboriginal freehold land, albeit then immediately leased back to the NT government. In this instance, is avoided potentially drawn out legal battles with no guarantee of success in the context of land rights and traditional owners getting full ownership. The underlying land tenure, the land rights tenure, is actually quite strong in the territory, and traditional owners have full power to say no to mining. Some of the other things that kind of on offer is that an annual rent is paid in the leases or through the leases, and a 50% share of revenue generated from any park activity. The traditional owners decide what to do with that money. It's their money, it's their business. More opportunities for traditional owners to access country that they may not have in the past. And I'd say indeed in the Northern Territory, could be argued that historically people had more access and connection to pastoral lands than parks, and parks are often quite regulated areas of land, and tourism can restrict people's normal activity of practicing and living on their country and accessing the country. Part of the deal was also the push for living areas on park, and that there needed to be recognition that people need to live on country and on the parks to be able to effectively participate in joint management and access their country. I'll reflect on whether some of these have been achieved or not. And the obvious one of having a say over parks and how they're managed. Economic opportunities is a sort of key benefit that it's talked about in the joint management context. Development of tourism enterprises, contracting, fee-for-service, employment training, and then protection of cultural values, sacred sites, etc. So I'll try and scoot along. Just in terms of the highlights, or whether these benefits are being realised in that relatively short period of joint management. What's the reality? Well, I guess there has been some highlights in the early stages of joint management. There was lots of work and planning on country and getting people back to places that they may not have visited for long periods. And there was some funding to support this, an initial injection, and a lot of momentum gains, good feeling, good intentions. And the cynic in me might refer to that period as the honeymoon period. Traditional owners definitely have received income and used that income for their benefit, and doing some good stuff. There's definitely been some more input into park management decisions, and for example, permits, fire, input into how fire's managed on the parks, input into visitor information, and name changes of parks, make the parks actually sort of feeling like they're Aboriginal land and not national parks. Sacred site protection, the planning workshops through country visits and planning sessions to inform the development of the management plans, and there are quite strong processes in place to ensure traditional owners consent and agree to what goes into the management plans. In terms of employment outcomes, there's definitely been some highlights there. And again, the early stages, there was an initial injection of funding to support this and some creative approaches to employment models and not just sort of going down the same pathway. I'd say that some of that has fallen away though now. There has been some engagement with non-park or community-based ranger groups that have undertaken fee-for-service type work. But I would just say that I think that, you know, joint management alone or the structures, and this has been mentioned, don't necessarily guarantee the outcomes in that employment space. There really needs to be a sort of creative and different ways of looking and enabling some change. And I think, you know, in terms of the legal framework, locking in some specific employment-related targets and aspirations into agreements helps, but it's kind of not the be-all and end-all. We really need to resource and do other things there. In terms of the challenges, obviously, I'm sure we're all familiar with this, that resourcing, joint management costs money. Parks agencies often don't have much of it, or at the bottom end of budget decisions in government. It's hard to do it if you don't have the resources, and no matter how many good ideas people might have and how good the intentions might be. And my experience is, I guess, in the NT is that once management plans are completed, there's often a long time between interactions. And so after that initial intense period of engagement with traditional owners to develop management plans, joint management is reduced to periodic meetings. And then so that lack of engagement, I guess, in between can lead to traditional owners feeling like they don't have control or influence. I guess the post-honeymoon period. But, you know, this all does come back to resources and properly supporting joint management. I think there can be very different views and approaches to looking after country. Parks, Western science have a certain way of doing things that may clash with traditional owners' way of looking after country. It can result in frustration and feeling of not being listened to or respected. And in many instances, you know, looking after country, certainly in Central Australia, is really about, you know, intergenerational knowledge transfer, visiting country, people being on country, which may not fit the kind of work model, the mainstream kind of work model. I think joint management, and people have talked about this, is really about sharing power and control. And this isn't straightforward, relies on a certain level of capacity from both parks agencies and traditional owners. I think being able to problem solve together and open to seeing things differently is really critical to an effective partnership. And there can often be a lot of tension and misunderstanding in this area. The term, I think, joint management, I might be a little bit pedantic here, but I think suggests an equal partnership, whereas it generally isn't, in the sense that, you know, Parks Agency tends to, for fair reasons, hold all the financial risk and control budgets. I think it's just more that the expectations created from the concept of joint management may not meet the reality, and again lead to frustration. I think having a voice at a higher level in parks agencies is lacking and could shift the pendulum a bit there. There can also be a tension between or due to traditional owners being the landowner and landlord in the NT, as well as the joint management partner. So on the one hand, traditional owners are setting the rules through the leases for parks to comply with, but on the other, expecting to work in partnership with parks to implement those rules. And if the rules aren't being met, it essentially then is the responsibility of the parks agency or the lessor. bureaucracy, I'll let that go. I think it's fairly obvious that, yeah, some things can be difficult to navigate your way through government processes to get projects off the ground that are traditional owner led. And just to finish, just to make a few sort of comments or reflections, and this is, I think I'm probably just reiterating what's already been said quite a bit here, is having a clear idea of the expectations of joint management is critical. What is the purpose? What's going to change and how? What is different from how things are done at the moment? What do we want out of joint management? Also important to have an understanding of what the other party wants. And I think, again, if things are being traditional owner led, it's very different to government sort of going, here, how about this? I think we really need factor in ways and a commitment to checking whether joint management is living up to the expectations and that willing to adapt. Yeah, we've talked about it. It's a journey, and it will be different in different places and at different times, and continuously evolving. And as it with any relationship, there will inevitably be good and not so good times. Joint management needs to be resourced and capacity developed, getting the right skills and supporting people to build their skills to operate effectively in a joint management context or collaborative governance context is the key. The structures are one thing and the legal frameworks are one thing, and they're good to have to sort of fall back on, but I think an approach is and a way of doing things is really critical. And the difficult bit really. Relationships and trust between the partners really also needs to be built. And this can be done through having strong leadership and champions or so-called champions to keep things on track and heading in the right direction. But going back to having a clear vision, really, an understanding of what the expectations are and being open and honest about what is achievable and ways of working together to address issues when they arise. That is me. Thanks, Bill.
Thanks, Peter. Thanks a lot for that. We've had quite three interesting presentations thus far. Unfortunately, we're just having a little bit of technical issues with the Wreck Bay Aboriginal Community Council representatives online. So we're going to look at breaking early and hopefully we'll get them to join us in the Q&A panel. Maybe during this break, so what we'll look at doing is you need to go back through the timeline. If you wish to take part in the morning tea break, networking, please do. Also, you just need to push join on there. If you're not a part of that networking part, please come back and join us about 11:30 with and we'll start the next session. Also, I just want to remind you there is that meeting hub. You can connect with other participants and also checking out the resource gallery. But the main things when we come back, we'll be actually looking at through that Q&A session. Please, someone generate a little bit of courage to ask some questions online through the video. Georgia will check your video and you can ask a question of each of the panel members. Also, please, through the live Q&A, you can actually write a question and we'll try and get that through to the presenters at that time. So once again, I would like to thank all of the presenters. Hopefully we'll have Wreck Bay mob with us for the Q&A. Until then, I'll see you again at 11:30. Thanks a lot.